Hi, I'm Robertson. I'm an educator and author who works with schools in developing social, emotional, and behavioral supports for students impacted by adverse childhood experiences and trauma. In this session, we're going to be exploring behavior as a form of communication. We come back to the fact that through their behavior, our students communicate fundamental needs for safety, belonging, and feeling valued within healthy, protective relationships. Now I'd like to take some time to unpack safety, belonging, and feeling valued. When we talk about safety, there's many dimensions to safety, but we're going to look specifically at physical, intellectual, and social emotional safety. And as I talk through it, I'm also going to mention some strategies that you may want to take back to your classroom or your school. So to begin with physical safety, one of the ways we create physical safety within our classroom is through routines. Consistent routines and expectations. And we teach routines throughout the entire school year, not just the first 3 weeks of the school year. So in other words, a teacher who comes to me and says, Ricky, it's May and I'm still teaching my students how to line up when they come in from recess. Or a teacher who says, I teach chemistry and I still have to give my high school students time to organize their binders and their materials. These are good teachers. The prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that helps us manage emotions and control impulses, it doesn't fully develop until we're 25 years old, give or take a few years, which means we have to teach, model, and practice routines from the time we teach them how to line up to come into preschool until we teach them how to line up to get their high school diploma. Now, for children who've experienced different forms of trauma and adversity, routines and structure is essential for their well-being. But it's also like eating their broccoli. In other words, it's a nutrient. They need it, but they also might hate it. We have to expect that students will challenge our routines and expectations and respond in ways that are connected and firm. To borrow a phrase from Jane Nelson and those who work in positive discipline, we have to connect before we correct behavior. Something as simple as, I can tell you're frustrated, but we don't throw things in here. Please pick that up. Or it's great to see you. What's our rule about cell phones? Thank you. So just noticing the student before we redirect the behavior. And that simple act of connecting before we correct helps to keep the relationship intact while also creating a sense of positive accountability. Now, in addition to physical safety, there's also intellectual safety, creating learning environments where it is safe enough to make mistakes and learn from them. One of the strategies we can use to create intellectual safety is growth mindset feedback. Sitting down with a student, identifying where they're stuck and facing a challenge, providing them with actionable feedback and then encouragement, and encouraging them to persist and continue to put forth effort. And lastly, I want us to think about social emotional safety, which for me is really about creating shame-free learning environments. Now, one of the ways we do that is to lean into and express acknowledgement, encouragement, and gratitude. Now, this is different from positive reinforcements and token economies and leaning heavily into external rewards. And so what I'm going to say here, some folks may disagree with, it may be a little controversial, and I certainly apologize if I offend anyone in saying this, but what I want us to consider is that when we rely exclusively on external rewards, so, classroom tokens and point systems and class dollars and this and that as the primary way that we manage behavior in a classroom, that it's a bit like giving students candy every time they do something good. In moderation, candy's fine. Too much of it, it's unhealthy. It spoils the kid. And we have research that shows when we rely too heavily on external rewards, we can actually kill off a young person's sense of intrinsic motivation. And so, and we can even set kids up where in elementary school, if we're giving them a reward every time they blink, and then by the time they get to middle school and high school, we pull those rewards and incentives back, then we suddenly have students where we go, oh, these kids aren't motivated. But we've kind of set them up to have to rely on that external reinforcement for every single thing that they do. Now, I'm not telling you to get rid of your point systems and your classroom dollars tomorrow, etc. What I am inviting you to do, though, is think about using them more in moderation or even on a case-by-case basis. Some students benefit from having highly structured systems of reinforcements and rewards. And for some students, that is absolutely important and valuable. and important to use as a strategy. However, it may not be the best practice for supporting behavior for all of our students. Perhaps we might pull back a little and use those points and rewards more in moderation, or not use them at all and lean more into authentic moments of connection, gratitude, and encouragement. So in other words, if a student helps to pass out papers, rather than just giving them a class dollar, I might instead say, thank you so much for helping to pass out those papers. That was so helpful. Or if I see a student working really hard on an essay, I might leave them a positive post-it note that says, I'm so proud of you, you've worked so hard on this essay, great effort, and just leave that positive post-it note on their desk so that they can read it later. And this way, I've started to create an environment where there's an authentic sense of feeling valued, of feeling seen, and of feeling a sense of belonging. Now, conflict is inevitably going to arise. And whenever there's conflict, shame is often close behind, especially if someone feels like they're at fault for something that has caused harm. And so to truly create an environment that is a shame-free learning environment that has that positive accountability, we have to be willing to teach students how to accept responsibility. I often work in schools where I hear adults and professionals in the building say, oh, kids in this school, they're not held accountable, they don't take responsibility for anything. And that means it's an opportunity for us to teach them how to accept responsibility in healthy ways. Now, I was once a math teacher in New York City, and I taught math to high school grades 9 through 12. And even in my math classes, I had 3 steps to accepting responsibility in my class. Because nothing works if we don't keep our word. And if we do something that causes harm or disrupts the learning of others, we need to accept responsibility for it and then behave differently and more appropriately. So for me, in my classroom, we had 3 steps to accepting responsibility that were written right on the board. Now, these were my own, so you may adopt them, you may make them your own, you may not like them, but for me, I said to my students, the first thing we have to do is if we do something that causes harm or disrupts the learning of others, or we don't keep our word, the first thing we do is we apologize. The second thing is we acknowledge the impact our behaviors have had on others. And the third step is we take action to repair the harm. So apologize, acknowledge, and repair, which meant that I, as the teacher, had to model that. So if I promised to have tests graded on Monday, and I show up at school on Monday and the tests aren't graded, maybe I had a really bad weekend, maybe I had a really good one, but I have to say to my students, I promised to have the tests graded, they're not done. And I apologize and I acknowledge that some of you are left still anxious about your grades. And I commit to grading them tonight and returning them tomorrow. So now, if I'm working with a student, and I don't know if you've ever had a student like this, but maybe I have a student who just absolutely refuses to accept responsibility. And I'm working with that student, and we've reached a point where there's a conflict. I can now sit down with her and I can say, listen, this is who I know you to be. You helped pass out those papers. You worked really hard on that essay. You're hardworking, you're thoughtful, you're helpful. You've seen me have bad days. You've seen me mess it up and have to repair the situation. Can you and I talk about how to fix this? And I'm going to get a lot farther in that process because we've built in that social emotional safety. Next, I'd like to talk about that need for belonging. I truly believe that we're in a crisis of belonging within our society. And when I'm talking about belonging, I'm talking about authentic belonging, students who feel seen, valued, and affirmed in their culture, their identities, and their languages. When I say that we're in a crisis of belonging, I want to mention for a moment research that's been done about interactions between family members, between parents and caregivers and their children. Studies where researchers have observed families out in public, out at the mall, out at dinner, etc., and have noticed that parents and caregivers spend most of their time on their phone and directly interact with their child when their child is misbehaving. Now, if I'm a child, attention from a parent or a caregiver is survival. So if I have to act up to get you to put your phone down and directly interact with me, then that's what I'm going to do. But the problem is, what I'm learning is to settle for negative attention as a substitute for real connection. And now when I get to school and I act up and I'm in trouble, I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to cry about it. In fact, it might even be the moment when I know that I matter, because that's what I've been taught. And we know that attention is not a substitute for real connection. That as young people get older in our society and they get their devices and they get on social media is an economy of attention. It teaches young people all that matters are likes and views and followers. It's not surprising then that we have a generation of young people, particularly teenagers, that report skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, and we see that increase in proportion to how much time they spend on devices and social media. That we see young people profoundly dysregulated. That when they come to school, we take their phones away, or they put their phone away, or they're constantly reaching for their phone. But oftentimes we have to realize we've basically given kids a slot machine, and now we're taking it away from them or telling them not to use it. And so a lot of times during the school day, what we're seeing is withdrawals, in my opinion, from an addiction to technology, to the constant dopamine hits that comes with being connected to a screen. The other thing that we notice is that when parents and caregivers, when they're out in public, they're doing the best they can, etc., a kid might start to act up or get fussy or get loud. And oftentimes what we do is we hand the kid what? A device. And these are missed opportunities that are essential for children's healthy brain development. Two of the most important protective factors for children's healthy brain development are parent and caregiver attunement and connection, and play. And we've seen both of those protective factors significantly diminished for all children in our society. Parent and caregiver connection and attunement refers to when a parent or a caregiver responds to a child while they're experiencing different emotions, happy, sad, nervous, excited, whatever it might be. But in those moments, children learn how to respond to their emotions, how to identify them, how to respond to others with empathy. And the other critical protective factor we've seen significantly diminished is play. Play is a child's job. In acts and moments of play, children learn communication skills, problem-solving skills. They lay the neurological foundation for empathy, for creativity. And there are so many skills that are developed within play. And so when we think about the behaviors we're seeing and the fact that trauma has been with us since the beginning of time, what we've not had is this perfect storm of increased rates of ACEs and trauma, particularly in the past couple of years since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also coupled with a generation that has become increasingly dependent, and I would even venture to say even addicted to, technology and screens and the dopamine hits that they get from them, that further dysregulate the brain, causing a greater likelihood for issues with impulse control, interrupting short-term memory, even interrupting sleep. So in the face of these challenges, what can we do? I want to offer two suggestions. One, if you're a parent or a caregiver, screen time limits are a battle worth fighting. Moderation, for yourself as well as for your child. Now, if you're a teacher, what I want to invite you to do is to delete from your vocabulary the phrase attention-seeking behaviors. And you know what I mean by that. That's when we say, oh, that kid just wants attention. And what I want to invite you to replace it with is connection-seeking. Perhaps some of the challenging behaviors I'm seeing in my classroom are actually bids for connection. And when we look at a behavior as connection-seeking, it changes the way we respond to it. Because if I say, oh, that kid just wants attention, then I can either ignore it or resent it. But if I say that kid wants connection, then maybe I need to start to build that relationship, even with a simple strategy like 2x10, a 2-minute conversation for 10 consecutive school days. Simple strategy shown to significantly improve engagement, behavior, and even attendance. 2-minute conversation, just asking the student about their day or a topic that they're interested in. Doesn't have to be related to school at all. Maybe I need to build that relationship, or maybe that student needs a classroom job, or maybe they work better in pairs or in small groups. But thinking about ways for that young person to get those needs for connection met in healthier ways. Which brings us to the final need of feeling valued. When I talk about feeling valued, I'm talking about creating opportunities in our classrooms for our students to have meaningful opportunities to participate and contribute, to have voice and choice. That might look like class circles, classroom jobs, Socratic seminars, project-based learning, community service projects, leadership opportunities. Feeling valued is intimately connected to motivation. When I have a student who's not motivated, one of the first questions I ask myself is, what can I do to create an authentic experience of success for that student in my classroom? And that might mean that I have to kind of identify and discover that young person's what I'll call island of competence, to reference the work of Bob Brooks, to find that source of aliveness, that spark, the thing that student is passionate or curious about or feels competent in, and how can I connect my instruction to that? And then how can we celebrate progress, not perfection? So if we get one problem done tomorrow on the worksheet, then we're going to celebrate that. If we get two the next day, we're going to celebrate that. And we're going to gradually continue to celebrate that so that as that student has more experiences of success, they want those experiences, and we then see them become more motivated. In closing, when we view behavior as a form of communication, it's important to keep in mind that many of the behaviors we may encounter can be challenging, contradictory, confusing, maddening. But if we're willing to view them through a trauma-informed lens, if we're willing to view them as a form of communication, as attempts to get fundamental needs for safety, belonging, and feeling valued met, then we can respond in ways with greater empathy and compassion. We can also begin to understand that the behaviors we see sometimes may just be the tip of the iceberg. They may actually be pointing to very real challenges and difficulties with the ways that child's brain is functioning due to exposure to toxic stress and trauma. And in turn, we can perhaps even take it a little less personally and look for ways to support that student in learning a new behavioral language within the context of a relationship founded on trust and mutual understanding.
The Trauma-Informed Teaching Series is made possible by a partnership between the National Education Association and WETA. For more information, please visit adlit.org/trauma.